I got nothing. I was up last night to see the shadow of the sun go over the moon, and we've spent the last month trying to define things that cannot be defined and looking for answers that nobody else out there on the internet seems to have. I think I should stop reading all of the 170 Substacks that I've somehow subscribed to. I haven't paid for all of those, but Substack is a wild and woolly country, and by now I think we need some hope. We need some celebration. We need some joy and deliciousness. So tonight we celebrate with pies. Welcome to the Mosaic Ark. Happy Pie Day! That's the best I got. That's the best I got. Did you wake yourself up last night to see the eclipse?
I didn't go to bed. I just
Oh,
stayed
you
up and
just stayed
watched it.
up.
I'm kind of a crazy insomniac. I did get too tired to stay all the way up, but I got to watch it start waning
Mm.
until it reached the halfway mark. I'm like, okay, that's really cool. Now I'm going to bed. That took about 2 hours.
You stayed up longer than I did. We're both kind of droopy today.
I'm droopy all week because of daylight savings time.
Oh my
I've never
gosh,
liked it.
yes.
I hate it. It takes a week to recover. It
That's
shouldn't,
why
but I
I'm
think
so tired. Oh my gosh, I was like thinking like, what have I been doing this week? That's it, right?
yeah,
The
yeah.
time is out of joint as always at this part. Just like, yeah, I feel so exhausted. When can we, like, of all of the executive orders, why didn't we have one canceling daylight savings time, for goodness sake? Good
Well,
grief.
I think Musk was floating the idea. He was doing like he was doing some surveys or something like that on X, and I
Everybody
was
hates
thinking,
it. Why do we
I'm like,
still have it?
I didn't answer. It's like you're asking the wrong question. Do you want it at all? Is the question, and no, I don't.
But it's
I was
it's like
waiting.
it's like the dance we do. I mean, we've been thinking about dances a lot in our poem. The dance we do absolutely every single year. Everybody hates it, and somehow we're still doing it. Everybody like crashes and accidents, and I think it's totally appropriate. We had an eclipse last night. It's like even the moon can't handle it.
It doesn't make any sense to me. I think it was first started during the First World War because they wanted to use it for factories. But I'm like, even that doesn't make any sense. Why don't you just change the time you start working in it? What has it got to do with what did it get anybody ever? And then it disappeared, and then they brought it back in the 70s, and they said, "Oh, it's gas crisis." Honestly, I just think they're messing with us just because they can, because it makes no sense.
The who the they is. I mean, I am so weary. I mentioned I've been this whole week has been like spring cleaning and dealing with that. And one of the things I figured out that if I fed all of the things that I'd subscribed to on Substack into my email, I just went nuts. So I figured out how to
Yeah.
send those posts just I don't know. Anyway, I just like because I like reading them, but I was just getting overwhelmed. But the thing is, I'm it's like there's a lot out there. I was thinking it would be fun to do well, I don't know. We should invite more people that I found on Substack to join us and
That
be
would
our
be
special
fun.
guest. Yeah. So guys, be wary. If I found you, you may be dragged
Yeah.
into the salon and have to deal with us. Um, but the thing I'm noticing most right now is okay, so the reveal is done, right? We all know that it goes down several layers to it, at least to the propaganda around the First World War, which fits with daylight savings
Oh,
time.
yes, it does. As a matter of fact.
That we've been living in this dream like nightmare for at least 100 and some years, over 100 years. Yeah, the
108 years.
building we're living in was built in around 1910, 1915, somewhere around there. So it's like entire
Oh,
lifetime of my house, my home.
yeah. Isn't that
We've
walls
been
could talk? Oh, that is
insane.
very interesting.
What?
I said if walls could talk, that's very interesting. So yeah, First World War era building, at least when it started in Europe, right? And up until now.
Yeah, but exactly that, right? And so and the problem of I did a nice interview midweek this week with a young man from Australia. Hi, Mark.
I listened. That
Um,
was good. That
yeah,
was a good
he
interview.
was way better prepared than we ever are.
I know. He asks great questions. That was really just such an informative talk.
Yeah,
It's,
guys,
yeah,
if you
like I
don't
said,
want to
way better
listen
than
to us
me.
ramble around, in our weaving women way, Thomas More Society link that I've put out this week. He actually planned ahead and took me through all
Smart
these
man.
questions. But I was thinking about this is like why it's saying, oh, I forgot what I was talking about now. The layers of, what are our misconceptions about the Middle Ages? And I'm like, well, that they ever ended, but
Right.
that we're still in them. But the one of the things I was pointing out is that the worst thing from my perspective is that we live in a consciousness of history that's really only 100 years ago. I mean, maybe like if you go back into the oldest people with social security numbers, right? 350 years
Hmm.
old, right? So you might even go back that far, right? But for the most
Yeah.
part, people don't really think back much before the 19th century and the electric media time, right? We're barely people can barely remember the just print time that we
And you know, it's crazy to me because this is we us and our great great grandparents lived in the age of photography. How could you not think about it? I think about it as if it happened last week because you've got all of these pictures of people and movements and historical events. How could you not think about it? Maybe just people just don't look because I get fascinated by things that bore most people. So
but
maybe
that's
that's just a
still
me thing.
no, that still fits in the time that I'm saying. I think it's almost as if reality only starts for most people's imagination around the time of photography and the telegraph,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
right?
I was thinking they don't even think about 100 years ago. They just think about last week.
Well, maybe with the digital level of things, so that everyone is living only in I mean, the immediate, like past decade, maybe, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
The social media time, and I again with Mark, I was talking about the sort of thinness of everybody's imagination that
Hmm.
it's like the Substack conversation is desperately trying to drag us back into the past somehow so that we see how the kinds of things that we're living in have been going on for some time. But it you know the it feels like we've got the more enlightened we're getting, the more revelations of the method there are, the shallower everything is becoming. It's really quite, or are we just sleep deprived from this change of time zone? But but it does
We
feel like that, right? It's like how can we ever break out of this um flatland that it just feels like everybody is in?
Hmm. Can you give me an example of flatland? I mean, a concrete example.
Well, the way I feel it, I'm thinking of what we have our pie club here. Like, so the pie club, because today is Pie Day, right? And the pie club, of course, came across my attention a few weeks ago when we were talking about categories, right? And this one seemed brilliant
Hmm.
to me. So the two pies are talking, and they have a pie club, right? And one says, "Hi, steak and kidney. I'm Apple. Can I join your pie club?" Sure thing, Apple. Welcome to Pie Club. Okay, so pie can clearly include both savory and sweet. The pie club can include both, main course and dessert or something like that. But
Mhm.
the both the pies, they look on the outside the same because they have crust top and bottom, right? And then a third one comes and says, "Hi, I'm a ramekin of casserole with a neat little puff pastry hat. Can I join your pie club?" At which point the one of the pies, undistinguished, I'm not sure which one's which because the two other pies look exactly alike. One's apple and one's steak and kidney, and I think it must be steak and kidney who says, "F off." To the poor little ramekin with its cute little head, it's a neat
Yeah,
little
and
puff
then
pastry hat.
he said
And the ramekin is sad and saying, "Why isn't it a pie? It's got filling, it's got crust, but it doesn't have a top and bottom crust, and therefore it can't be part of the pie
exactly,
club."
like the sandwich according to the USDA. So
Like the sandwich, although we have figured out that peanut butter and jelly is not a sandwich according to the US. What? Didn't you find that? That there's
I did,
that they have to
yeah,
be a certain amount of bread and meat, and if it's a
and meat.
and meat. So peanut butter is
Mhm.
not meat. Therefore, peanut butter and jelly is going to be in the same situation as this puff pastry casserole.
Well,
Not, in
the high
fact,
sugar
a sandwich.
given the high sugar content of most white bread, which is the bread to put peanut butter and jelly on, by the way, the only bread, it's more like cake, isn't it, with a filling?
Yeah, like it's like fruit and nut chocolate
Mhm.
with bread
Yeah,
as sugar. Wait.
yeah.
Right? Anyway, so thinking about flatness, I'm just thinking about this poor ramekin with its puff pastry hat, and that's a flatness. No, I don't know. So, um, I mean, what one obviously the flatness for me is the perpetual ignorance of history that people seem to live in now, and with the flip side irony of, and I've as we've been talking about the categories, I've spent the last month putting together the syllabi for my new classes this coming term because I have to start teaching again on campus. And one of them is on Anglo-Saxon England, and I've been, trying to put together this, just not just a narrative history because that's complicated for reasons that may come up tonight, but a sort of practicum in how to study that 500 years of history. And one of the things that the scholarship points out is like almost nobody knows Anglo-Saxon history. Barely anybody studies it. Nobody offers classes in it. And this was 20 years ago, right? Never mind
Yeah.
now. And most people, if asked, like, tell me something, I'll ask you, right?
Okay.
Tell me something significant about the Anglo-Saxon period of English history.
It immediately precedes the Norman invasion.
By how much?
Oh, you mean when did it start?
Okay, that's a beginning.
With
When's
the
the Norman
Ingles,
invasion? We can do that. We can do that, right?
1066.
Very good.
All
So
right. So
how long had the peoples that we call the Anglo-Saxons been?
about 200 years after the Romans left, which is 400, so that would make it about 600, the
Good
600s.
deductions. Yes, very well done. Yes. So about
Thank you.
500 years, right? It's like 400,
Well
500 years
done.
between 597 when Gregory the Great sends well, actually, that 597 is the first date we have, right? Okay, one of the long, accounts is exactly when do they show up after the Romans leave. We know the Romans probably leave around 410 when the legions leave.
Hmm.
The Anglo-Saxon, there's about a 200-year period where we basically know nothing. And then there's another 400-year period where we know a little bit more than nothing. And yet, the numbers of people that are going to show up in my class, and absolutely some of them, are following me in the Telegram chat as I'm putting together the syllabus because there's some students in there going, "Oh yeah, what are we reading?" I'm like, well, you're convinced that there is such a thing as Anglo-Saxon history, right? Because it's hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yes, but is a lot of it written down?
Well,
Anything
you
written
can't
about?
have history unless it's written down because if it's not written down, it's all archaeology. and
Well, yeah.
No, seriously,
Yeah.
there's literally no history without writing, because otherwise you have no idea what happened, right? You have stuff, and you have stuff, and maybe you have land and stuff in the land,
You
but
have oral tradition and
how?
myths.
How?
People pass it on.
How would we know what it is?
How do we know if it's true, or how do we know what it is?
How would we know what the oral tradition is?
It would be very hard to trace backwards because it's using a different language.
Okay, is there anybody alive now who speaks the language that they were speaking?
Colloquially, actually, no. They can probably read it out loud, but that's about it because they don't know what it sounds like
Sort
because
of. I
nobody
mean, we're
speaks
kind of
it.
talking it now. Sort of, kind of.
Ah, yeah,
Yeah,
very
English
heavily
has been
influenced
through
by
a
Latin
lot
and French, right?
in the last 1,000 years, right? Starting with
Yes.
the Normans showing up and killing off all the nobility, and so it becomes the commoner's language rather than the elite language. And the
Mm.
Anglo-Normans come in and they speak French. So the court of the kings for several hundred years speaks French, and yet somehow we end up speaking English. It's magic.
The lower classes like us. That's it.
Yes, well, the towns and the the peasantry and such. So we assume that there's still people alive that maybe have ancestors that, you know, lived in England during this period that we call Anglo-Saxon and so
I
forth.
think the Frisian section of Denmark speaks something very similar to what they spoke, and so much so
Oh,
that we can understand some of their words. I just watched a video on that last week. It was really
right.
interesting.
Yes, yes. That we know. Okay, so this was not meant to be a history. I'm too tired to do an actual history lesson.
Sorry. Yeah, she's pooped today.
Well, I poop because of the
I'll try.
good grief change of the time zone, and and the exercise that we've had for the last 4 weeks of trying to tell the categories. What was my next picture after the pies? What did I say? Oh yes, here's a group of people standing in front of flags. Right, these people
Oh,
are all, of course, convinced at some level that they know what nations are because they've got flags, they've all got suits, and except one guy who doesn't wear a suit because apparently he has no nation. I don't know. It's like, how does he know what Ukraine is if he's not wearing a suit? Um,
is that Zelensky?
yeah.
Oh,
This is
okay.
his photo op when he went after Trump kicked him out of the White House. You go away and come
That was
back when you're
glorious,
ready
by
to
the
talk
way.
about peace. And so Zelensky goes to Europe and they all take pictures standing in front of their flags, right? And they're still convinced that they know deep in their bones, I guess. I don't know, right? It's like, so Pi Day, this is the conclusion that we're going to give up after this because it's just too tedious and difficult. If the
Well, it
pies
just
can't
never
figure out
ended.
what the casserole is a pie, how can, the peoples who are alive today figure out who they are as entity, as nations, right? How exactly do you define those borders? How it's like I'm going to spend the entire quarter trying to convince people that although we know such a thing as Anglo-Saxon England exists, it's actually pretty hard to say why we're convinced of that.
Well, I think we know it exists because the Normans conquered England and then started writing down history. So they knew who they were fighting and who they took the land over from.
The Danes.
The Danes were there too. Yeah, that's the Frisian. Yeah,
No, that's the immediate problem. It's like,
yeah.
why is William of Normandy thinking he's able to take over England? It's like, well, it's because Emma of Normandy had married Canute, and Canute had been king of England, and she had had children. And it, ironically, by the time William of Normandy conquers the Anglo-Saxons, they'd been intermarrying with the Danish and Norman family, with royal families already, and so who and yet William of Normandy claimed he was the rightful king of this region called England. Why? He's not even English.
Neither is anyone else, right?
Well, it's
They were
kind of hard.
Norman.
It's kind of hard
Yeah.
to tell, right? And so and this is the meme now will be British. I know what I am as British because I've got roots here, right? And here's this other
Oh,
guy that says the British guy is wearing the roots and a jacket, I guess. And there's this
Mm.
other guy in a tracksuit with the like international Nike logo on it, right? Piece of paper from a globalist saying he's British. Okay, so here's the British guy rooted in the land, and is confronting the guy who says he's British because he's got a piece of paper. Well, I put it to you, William of Normandy had an oath that someone had taken that made him think he came over on boats, took over England. The English haven't had an English king since 1066.
That's true. That's true. That were very, yeah. I think I still remember in 1992 when France and Britain agreed to remove their claims to each other's others' property
Right.
in
But I mean,
Normandy.
okay, so
Lasted that long.
I don't like so I like teaching. I like thinking about Anglo-Saxon history and like teaching Anglo-Saxon history. I have more difficulty after 1060s because like rah, rah, I don't want to talk about the Normans, right? And it does, the character of the story changes a lot once the Normans are there. But again, it's like, but why? We're convinced of this thing. Okay, this guy isn't even labeled English; he's labeled British.
Yeah, that's what I thought was kind of strange because yeah, why can't anybody be British? Well, British was the England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and so originally British meant you were from there, but then they became this empire, and then it gets confusing because there are people who are living outside of the original four countries that make up Great Britain, but they're part of the British Empire. Does that make them British? I don't think it did actually, because I don't think until recently they had a legal right to just move to England. I think I'm not even sure they still do. I don't think they
Well, this
do, but
piece
it
of
gets
paper
complicated.
problem, right? This piece of paper from a
Yeah,
globalist saying he's British. Okay,
right.
so the chat is here. Welcome everybody, Chad and Felix and Saint Martin. Um, uh, Felix is saying, "I never eat the bottom crust. Am I not a true pie eater?" No, you're not. You have to eat the
No,
bottom
you're not.
crust.
Shape
Daydreamers
up.
here. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, so we're here now, and we're still trying to figure out this terrible problem of what nation is. Now, the British one will say, it's about being rooted in the land, but this is, and I did the best. This was the best I could come with the Poland balls, right?
No. Yeah.
It's it's England fighting Britain
Oh, is that
because
what that was? I thought it was
yes.
Poland.
No,
Okay.
Poland's the what? Just no. This one's the English ball, right? And
Okay.
England. Does anybody actually? And this, oh phooey, this was in my head and I've forgotten to review it. Um, there is no such thing as English anymore.
Well,
England. It's like you were naming the
if
other
there is.
countries, right? Wales and Scotland and
No, I named
Ireland.
all four of them: England, Ireland, Scotland, and
England,
Wales.
England,
Yeah.
England is the only one that doesn't have any identity. Ironically, right? So
Well,
England,
the
what?
it's so tied to Britain because of the English monarchs.
Except
The,
for we've
the
established that they weren't, right? The monarchs have not been English since 1066. They've been,
was Elizabeth not English? I mean, her mother was English,
sort of, right? But the Tudors are Welsh.
but her mother wasn't a Tudor.
Oh, wait, which Elizabeth? The most recent one?
Elizabeth the First. I'm sorry, Elizabeth the First.
Anne Boleyn. Right.
Yeah.
But the whole point about the Tudors is they're Welsh.
Oh, were they?
Yes. So,
Oh.
the Normans are Norman from Normandy, right?
Mhm.
And then the Angevins, the Plantagenets are Angevin because Henry marries. Henry is in fact Matilda's son with Geoffrey of Anjou, so they're Angevin, and the Angevins, Plantagenets. They're still not. I mean, they're still not English, right? They're not marrying into the English nobility because there isn't any
Mhm.
because William killed them all. Um, Henry the Third, his uh, John, who's Henry the Third's mother. Anyway, the reason they end up in the Hundred Years' War is Edward the Third claims to be king of France because his mother was French, right? And
Mhm.
then do the 14th and 15th century Wars of the Roses. York, Lancaster. Tudors come in. They claim the king the throne, and then the Stuarts, who are Scottish, and then because of the Stuarts, you end up with the union with Scotland. But because Anne has no living children, you bring in the Hanoverians, so they're German,
Germans
right?
again.
Right. And then Victoria marries Albert, who's Saxe Coburg, right? Which they changed
Mhm.
their name to Windsor in World War One. See, we're still living in the World War One fantasy that there is such a
Yeah,
thing
we can't
as.
seem to get away from
But
that
by
weird
then it's
triangle.
the United. It's the empire, right? And so England just gets like erased in the imagination, right? People have been using the English flag recently with the St. George cross, and being
Mhm.
called racist and all sorts of things. But it's interesting because it's the one of the four that it's like it doesn't have any of the markers of a nation right now.
Right
Certainly
now, when's the last time it did?
1065.
Just 65. But they were all French.
No, in 1066 they're
That's
French.
the year before, right? Yeah.
But even
Year
then, I mean,
before
the
the year was
problem with
changed.
the Harold Godwinson, the reason Harold Godwinson becomes king is the Godwins had been allying themselves with the Danes. I learned this recently reading for my course because it's really confusing. It's like where did Godwinsons come from? And it's like it's because the Danes the people I can't rehearse this because it's too complicated, but Ethelred makes various mercenary deals with the Danes so that when he dies, Canute ends up king, and he's king of Denmark as well as England, and Harold Godwinson plumps with the Danes, so he's like allying with the foreigners, if you count them as foreigners. It's
Mhm.
like who's who, right? Because there's plenty of Danes that are living in, for example, York, because they took over in East Anglia. They took over the region of the Danelaw. It's way
Mhm.
harder than you think to even find
Mhm.
England. I hope I've triggered the chat.
One of us did, I'm sure.
Okay. Um, Okay, Chad saying it's because people use British as something of a nation rather than an empire ruling over a nation. It confuses matters in most people's heads. Very much
Yes.
so, right?
Mhm.
British used to mean any of the nations originating in the British Isles, also money from the nation of the Britons, right? But it's been a game like this all along. That why do we call it Britain when in fact you've got these multiple nations under the empire British? It's the British Empire, right? Or the United Kingdoms. It's plural, and England itself has experienced this kind of erasure that it's a little bit like, I mean, interestingly, from my perspective, it's a little bit like the erasure of the Scots Irish in America. You
Mm.
say American, or as I was driving to fencing practice, I was listening to Tucker Carlson's conversation with this guy from South Africa. I really wish I'd remembered his name. I if you listen to that more recent interview, somebody look it up. Who was he talking to? The South Africans, the Boers, have a similar sort of erasure because they think of themselves as Afrikaans, and I
Mhm.
was thinking they're like the Americans, like the Scots Irish that my family was, who identify themselves with the land where they are and lose their like ancestral grouping because we don't think of ourselves actively, except my dad, right? Actively as Scots Irish, unless you have to really reactivate that. If you ask most people from that region, Appalachia, Midwest, right, who are you? And they'll say Americans. The Boers say the same things about themselves as Afrikaans, right? They're from Africa.
Mhm.
They are the Africans, like we're the Americans. But they're and Tucker talking to him, I wish I could remember his name, pointed out that the Zulus, like one of the major black tribes, were also invaders in that territory. So
Mhm.
it's like the mobile populations of the tribes in the United States. Nobody's on the land that they were. It's like going back to the rooted guy, right? Root
Mm.
where, right?
Yeah.
You were quite rightly saying it's like we have the Britons, the British, there who are there under the Empire, the Roman Empire. So Britannia is the British province, but British province, the English Roman province. But the Anglo Saxons invade or move in, are invited in, or invade or invited in. We don't know for sure, right? There's a lot of debate in the archaeology now about like, did they come have did what scale of immigration was it of the Anglo-Saxons? Was it tens of thousands? Was it more like
I always assumed it was huge, right? And they came from the area that's now Germany, correct?
and then you have to start sort of calculating numbers of boats and how many people on the boats. And in fact, if it's like a certain number of boats over this amount of time, yes, it could have been
And
this.
if they sent home for people
And they
to
sent
come,
home for
hey, the
people,
land's great
yeah,
here.
right. Or and they definitely we definitely know. I mean, they murder a lot of the people who are the British who are living there already. Thus, King
Mm,
Arthur stories, or push them into Wales. Thus, the Tudors have their revenge on the English, right? Oh wait, the Normans, because they remember them. They have stories of themselves going back to when they were still British.
right.
Um, but in the archaeology, it's challenging because they're trying to figure out, what kind of uh, thing markers, right? What do you call it? Cultural, the cultural objects, the cultural artifacts. Is it because the people are always wearing the jewelry that go with their ethnic group, or did the jewelry, people adopt it? I've got, Navajo and not Navajo, and
Mm.
right, which is it? Am I wearing the jewelry because I'm that people, or am I wearing the jewelry because I like the jewelry? And that, if you're looking at burials and grave goods, it can get kind of tricky. So
That's a good point. Yeah.
the English came from somewhere else before they were in the island. And then they come there, they're not British, they're English, which is not what we think of as the British now, because they're English. They're actually English, not Welsh, not Scottish, not Irish. We'd have to do the whole like maps and stuff about, are the English mostly Saxon? Are they Mercian? Are they Northumbrian? Are they Wiccan? Are they East Anglian? Are they Sussex? Are they Wessex? Who are they? It's harder than you think.
So what were the Mercians?
Well, I mean, Bede doesn't even really include them in his history of the English Church because they're still pagan when he's writing. Or no, they had converted by the time he's writing, but he doesn't include the Mercians as much in his account of the English Church in the 7th century. He focuses on Kent. Kentish are people different from the Anglians, apparently, and the
Mhm.
Northumbrians are different yet again. Bede's in Northumbria. There's no way out on this question in these terms, right? Is it because they've lived there the longest? Is it like who came when, where, what? Is it the language they speak? Well, is it their rulers? Is it? You see why I'm exhausted.
Yes. You could exhaust yourself running around in circles trying to keep tabs on all the different groups.
Well, this is my job, right, as a historian, in the sense of, in the 19th century, they invented this thing called nations and wrote histories about it and invented them and found all the sources. And oh, this is a good here manuscript. Let's just go to, you said,
Mm.
we know things because stuff's written down, right? Good. What kind of things did the people writing in this squiggly script language write down that therefore could help us know what it means to be English? Because at least this is one of the dialects of what we call English, right? The speech of this people. Yeah.
Is that Anglo-Saxon
I
as written?
it Okay, so one of the things that we're going to learn in the course is, in fact, how they start using the nomenclature, just not just of Anglia, but Anglo-Saxons and then English, and then what king. England is an empire too.
Oh.
That's the giveaway, right? It's like there's multiple
Mhm.
groups of these people. They have gazillion numbers of kings. It's incredibly difficult to like narrate this story. I What I was expecting you to say when I ask you, like, what do you know about the Anglo-Saxons? Like, name a king.
Oh, name an Anglo-Saxon king. I can't.
Right. See? And so,
That was easy.
if you try really, really hard, people might remember Alfred, because the
I was
Victor
just going to say it was either, yeah, Alfred or Edward the first, but
those
I wasn't
help,
sure.
yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of there's a joke in 1066 and all that they're all named Egg of something. So there's a wave of Egg Kings, Egg Bert, Egg Stan, Egg this that. Actually, it's be more accurate to say there's waves of Ethels because there's a lot of Ethels that which means noble, right? So they like
Oh,
Ethelstan, Ethelred, Ethelbert,
yeah.
but it's nearly impossible to draw this in any like sensible way because you end up with not like the very neat, you can name the kings from William, right? You know, uh well, actually I should be able to. William, Henry, Stephen, maybe with Matilda, Henry, Richard, uh John, Henry, Edward, Edward, uh who comes after Edward the Third? Why can't I remember that? With the third, Richard. I mean, already to the 14th century, right? It's super easy to name the line after 1066. It's pretty much impossible for most people to even remember Ethelred. Never mind. Canute, Hardicanute, Harold Godwinson, Harold. No, wait, Hardrada. Anyway, England itself is in fact an empire of the Wessex kings who conquer
Hmm.
Mercia and then conquer Kent and then take over London and then make a treaty with the Danes and then eventually take over the regions that the Danes had settled in, the five boroughs, and then Northumbria. I hope I've narrated that correctly. England is an empire too.
Because they kept conquering all these separate, smaller kingdoms around them.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, they do seem to have had common languages, but the language we're speaking now is a blend of the Norse and the their language because it seems to develop along the line between the Anglo-Saxon kings and the Danes in the Danelaw.
Hmm.
So if we're insofar as we're speaking the common speech of anything, it's the common speech of the people living across Watling Street, right? This border between um, the southern part and the. Trust me, I can do this in a class, but try like if you try to play with the Poland ball level of like we know what England is, you're gonna be vexed, right? So we maybe we need to do it from another direction. So we've got here. Let's what's the chat doing? They've given up. They're they're
Never. This is great.
um okay. So Saint Martin is saying empires like the Holy Roman Empire preserves and protects nationality. Well, if I've just tried to
Mm,
bunglingly establish that even England was an empire of the English, I mean, the
yeah.
Holy Roman Empire is an interesting example because it's a region of all speaking Germanic dialects, right? There's multiple German dialects, High German, Low German, and all the different regional dialects. And so, in fact, the Holy Roman Empire is a good analog for what England was like in the Anglo-Saxon period because it's multiple dialects of a sort of similar tongues. But you don't think of the Holy Roman Empire as Germany until it unites as a state, whereas the English are able to unite as a state. Maybe nations are only their governments, but then we don't like that because then the Normans are whatever they are, right? Customary law. People close to a region for a long time knew best the common good, and so substance of common law. This is respected. Aha! Now I'll tell you about the law codes of the English. Okay, so I was teasing Casey about whether we have written records. What we have for this period for 500 years of Anglo-Saxon history, we have A, Bede, who is complicated because he's writing a very sort of Northumbrian version of why there is such a thing as the English church. But in his lifetime, there is no such thing as a single church under a single archbishop that's the English church. It just doesn't exist. He invents it to a certain extent. So we have Bede, and that's only okay. Bede. We have the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is little bits and pieces of reference to a lot of these different stories. We have the law codes of the English kings, and then we have this stuff that we're going to talk about in a second. And one of the books I've assigned for my class is a biography of Ethelstan, who's Alfred's grandson. Um, all of the sources for Ethelstan probably fill about 50 pages max, right? And he's one of the best referenced kings that we have for the period. My former graduate student fellow graduate student Sarah Foote wrote an entire book on Ethelstan that is basically possibly That's like if you did a like word search on what word she used most in that book is
It was possibly.
possibly, right? It's possibly this, it's possibly that. It's could have been, a whole lot of Anglo-Saxon history is conjecture on what could have possibly been the case based on the very, scattered kinds of legal and historical documents that we have. It's not very much for several hundred years, possibly. So that customary law, you said we would have their oral tradition. I put it to you again. How?
Well, today, no, but maybe Bede had it. Maybe because if he was basing his history on conjecture of what was available at the time, would it include that? I don't know. I don't know the
Okay,
answer.
I'm just gonna force you to be the uncomfortable student here. What la- what language did Bede write in?
Oh, what did he write in? Oh, it's either French or Latin. You want me to guess? French.
Nope, French doesn't have a written version at that time. He wrote in Latin.
Oh, that's
Whose
wrong.
language is Latin?
Latin's the language of the church.
Why?
Why is it the language of the church? I think it
In the
was made the
West.
official in the West. It was made the official language of the church in the West. Uh, I can't remember the year it was.
They don't do this kind of thing. They don't have executive orders like this. Why is it the language of the church? Where what is Bede's point in his story about saying, "Oh,
I think it,
Gregory the Great sent missionaries to Kent in 597 from if it takes you this long to get it, it's taking them just as long. So we'll just do this slowly, right? Why
okay.
is Bede writing in Latin?
Why is Bede writing in Latin? Is he a priest?
No, I think he's just a monk. I'm not. Did he take orders? I'm not clear.
Okay.
That's
If
that's
you were educated, that's what you wrote. That's what you wrote in. That was a
that a
unifying
definition of being
criteria.
educated is being able to write, and they wrote in Latin
Yes.
because
Why did they write in Latin?
mhm.
Because there was no other written language in England.
Yes, there's no other written language at this point when Beats. I mean, it's like Anglo-Saxon is one of the earliest written vernaculars. The King Ethelbert's law code he's the king when the missionaries come from. I'm not going to say where because you're going to remember it. The missionaries show up. Ethelbert is king, and his law code written in Anglo-Saxon is the oldest vernacular anything we have from this region, right? Except
Hmm.
for the manuscript that has written his law code and is copied in the 12th century. So I'm a little skeptical, right? But anyway, it's written in Old English. So we have the earliest laws are Ethelbert's but why are they writing in Latin? I mean, this is we sort of assume all sorts of like we live in this world where English is now our national language because of the executive order, and it's going to be officially the language of our country, nation, government. The government is going to be using this language that we are groping around in the dark. Why are they writing in Latin? Somebody tell me. Find them. I'm
I
defecting
don't
to
know, but I
cave.
think I think Latin was the official language of the church. Like, actually, was made official at some point.
Yeah,
But I don't
in the
remember what that
16th
point was.
century.
Yeah, I don't remember when that point
It's
was.
not this time. It's not this time.
No,
you're you're I mean, one, you're
no,
thinking too
no. It was
hard. You're thinking too
yeah.
hard about this and therefore but this is why people get tangled up in thinking that the guy with the roots is the most British person there is, right? Bede writing the history, the very first, okay, there's Gildas wrote The Fall of Britain, so that's one thing. But Bede writing the very first like history of Englishness writes in Latin, not English. Because there's no
Mhm.
written well, there is sort of a written version of English because the king wrote some laws in English. Where do the missionaries come from? You know this.
I don't know where the missionaries to
Okay,
England
where's
came
Gregory the
from.
Great?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. You're Catholic. Where does he
Is he
live?
from
What?
Gregory the Great was Pope? Is he? Oh, so they came from directly from Rome?
Yes.
Missionaries? Okay. All right.
Why are they using
No,
Latin?
aren't you think I was full of cotton this week?
Yes, I
That's
know. It's like if we're taking this long, just think about how everybody else
okay.
feels, right? To
Your
give them more,
students are going to feel
look,
so
okay,
smart
so
after
challenge
watching
tried
you.
to give them more authority and establish sovereignty, tie back to Rome and Greece. Okay, guys, you got to just think this
No,
through.
that's not
Why
why.
are
No,
they
if you were
using Latin?
they're using Latin because that was what educated people were educated in, because there weren't a whole lot of written languages throughout Western Europe. Latin was a written language, and it was an old one, and that was what was used in official documents. That's what
Why?
was used. Why was it used in official? Well, it was the only written one, but also they were probably being filed away in Rome.
It's the empire. It's the power language. It's the
The
language of
power, yeah,
power. Latin is the language of the Roman Empire. It's just
okay,
it's the same reason
but
the
we're
all the
talking about after it ended. The language didn't end.
okay, so I clear this is because the church is the Roman. Okay, no, guys, I gotta get you to think like historians. Why does the British Empire use English for all of its, documentation? Why does India use English for all of its documentation?
Oh, because of the British Empire.
Right. It's
And,
so
and
Latin is the language of the church for the same reason. And so the people that freak out about it being from Rome are not wrong in the sense that it was actually just the ordinary language of the empire.
no, it was the ordinary language of the
That's why
empire,
the
and if
Vulgate is
yeah,
in the common language. This is the sort of wild trick, right? It's like the English are going to end up with a written language because, you know, the church likes translating into the common tongue of the people.
right,
um,
yeah,
and the Vulgate, which like Bede's community at Wearmouth Jarrow in the early 8th century makes the giant Codex Amiatinus, which I actually do have a picture from at the end of this little exercise. It's the Vulgate translation, that Jerome made, but it's called the Vulgate because it's like the common language. It's
like
it's
vulgar,
not the
yeah.
fancy language. It ironically becomes fancy because it's an old language, but it let me disentangle the things I was trying to get you to say. We can't know what the oral tradition was unless it's written down. Once it's written down, it's no longer oral. So there's always this like, oh well, they must have had this oral tradition. How would we know? We
No, they must have
can't
had, yeah, they must
unless
have had an oral tradition centuries ago that it doesn't exist anymore. If you know about it, it's because it was written down. But
we
did
barely know
somebody
what
when they were
happened yesterday in the world of the internet when everything we say is recorded.
well, if somebody was writing something down 800 years ago, and would they say, and this came from oral tradition? I mean, they might occasionally say that. I think some Roman historians mention stuff like that, but I don't. It's possible they just wrote it down and didn't didn't give you their source.
Okay, this is the chicken and egg problem that I think we talked about this before with McLuhan stuff, right? It's like we're
Mm,
so used to thinking of language as something that has a written version, right? We forget the enormous leap that goes from what I'm doing with my sound right here to a transcription, like even transcribe it, write it down, code it in some way into script, right? That's
yeah.
actually very difficult. Um, among the many things that I did in this last week was watch My Fair Lady, which we talked about after we
Oh,
read
I
Henry
wanted to
Higgins
see that.
last. And
I got overruled in my
there
house.
at the beginning, the first, they first meet because Eliza's trying to sell the flowers in Covent Garden,
Mm,
and Higgins is behind the pillar transcribing down what she's saying, and she looks. He some guy tells her he's writing down everything you're saying, and she's like, I didn't do anything wrong. And she looks at the book that he is writing stuff down in, and it's like it's not an it's not it's his own like phonetic symbol system,
right.
right, to be able to transcribe what she says. And she's like, that's not what I said, and then can read it back, and it sounds like what she said. But
Yeah.
that trick of being able to write down what people sound like, it's like talk about the internet that we're suddenly digitized and coding everything that we're doing in our culture, and this somehow defining us because we're in this global world of intercommunication. Writing anything down is it's a nice scene in My Fair Lady, because writing anything down at all is an incredible magic trick.
Hmm.
How do you know that those symbols, how do you know how to render those squiggles on the page back into spoken sounds. It's
Yeah.
we we shame people for not being able to read. Well, it's actually really hard. It's like, can you read music? Can you read dance notation? Can you read fight notation? Can you read, math? Pi Day, happy
No, I
Pi Day, right?
can't.
We're on
It's
Pi
one thing
Day,
I can't
remember
read.
that. And every time you make fun of anybody not being able to read, can you read math? It's this math is exactly the same sort of thing. It's a symbolic encoding of a persuasive argument. So there it
True.
is
The
in a book,
language.
right? Now, this little side trip footnote on the problem of oral illiterate. Um, Bede's using Latin because they have the technology to write the Latin down. The amazing and extraordinary thing that the English, whoever they are, in these centuries do, even though they don't write as much as we wish they had. Um, they do have the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is in it's in Old English, isn't it? Oh God, I've been reading everything else and I can't remember what that is. Um, they also write a lot in Latin, but they make this leap to encoding their own language into script. That will be one of the reasons that people have a sense that there is such a thing as English, being English, right? It's manuscripts like the one we're looking at right now that give us. It's like all of those other languages are gone. It's like there's the only Gothic we have is written the Bible because there's
Yeah.
transcriptions of the Bible. All of these other ancient languages, they don't exist anymore. There's nobody speaking them. How would you know? I mean, it's like oral tradition. That's great. There's an oral tradition. How do we know what? Right? Only it's like you writing freezes languages in particular moments, right? So Latin's frozen in particular version of it. It's speaking, but that happens is the only way that we can know anything from different periods. And it's amazingly easy to take that for granted. Oh, like, well, we don't have any history. Why not? Because they didn't write it down. Why didn't they write it down? Because it's hard. You guys are still missing the point. So Peter and Paul's power, church is the Roman Empire. No, it's I mean, Rome is the center of the world because it's the center of the imperial power. They use Latin because it's the common speech of the empire.
Right. Right. I mean, they also spoke Greek and wrote in Greek, but anything
Greek
that
was
was,
Alexander's empire. One of the
right. No, but the Romans would translate things or change things and take them over from Greek into Latin.
right, yep.
But yeah, but they took over the Mediterranean and they took over the written word. Everything was written in Latin.
Well,
If anybody had another written
because
word and
it's
people,
the bureaucratic language that they're writing laws. I mean, the Anglo-Saxon kings
yeah,
write laws down because they need to look like kings, and what do kings do? Oh, they write laws, right? Their laws are like mainly about don't steal the cows, but and wear guilt. If you murder someone, you have to pay his family.
mhm,
Apparently, if you rape a woman, that she, that is a the penalties for that are quite severe as well. So there you go, virtue.
mm,
But it's not really virtuous in the way that. Well, anyway, we'll do the Anglo-Saxon law later. Um, Greek is an imperial language too because of Alexander.
mhm,
Um, so it's like the nations are constantly getting overridden by these linguistic juggernauts that we have is that we imagine that there's such a thing as Britain, or in fact, obviously they're arguing about whether Palestine exists or not, right? Roman provinces that are given identity because they're included in the empire. Britain was the province of the empire. So if you're British, are you something special and different, or are you just part of the Roman Empire? Going back to the guy in the roots, right? It's like British means
mm.
what, right? You're rooted in what? The empire was there when you were British. It's still there when you're British. It's still an empire.
The British Empire.
All of these are empires. I'm not sure. It's like the nations barely exist in my imagination anymore because every time you start looking for one, you realize it's that we have this image of their existing as a people. It needs a language so you can, I point to and identify it as language, but all of the ones we are able to name typically are the imperial ones, because they're the ones that give us these strata of um, record. I think,
Right. Well, the victors write the history books, right?
um, well, the Anglo-Saxons got defeated, so no.
I said the victors write them. The Anglo-Saxons didn't write the history books.
I okay, but we're looking at an Anglo-Saxon book now. It's like it's complicated, right? It's like the win in history, it's the people who write win. It's like if you've got something written
Yeah.
down and it can survive, then you end up with a story, and then people can say you existed. So the oral, the oral only lasts for the lifetime of the in living memory, right? It's like people alive have the oral tradition. Everything else has to have some kind of um written existence. Okay, have I belabored that enough, do you think? Uh okay, you guys are so, it's a point, the Roman Empire writing Latin because of the church. Well, it to think in historical terms is thinking about the accidents of how all of these things happen. Okay, so on screen we have this fancy, well, I mean, it looks fancy on to me, but squiggly fancy writing. Must be mystical, right? Must contain, I've given you this like intensely boring and tedious, and you're going to remember this, I hope, lesson, and don't take the languages or the books for granted, right? So we have here this precious um codex carrying the deep ancient stories of the English people, right? That's certainly what Tolkien would want, right? If we read this book and it contains the deep backstory mythology of what the Anglo-Saxons, whoever they were, however many layers we have and who they wrote. This book comes from Exeter, so it's in the far west, and Exeter becomes very important because of King Athelstan in the 10th century, probably because of its 10 mines. Really, don't let me go down that
Later.
I can't stop the pit, the Poland. The balls want it to be simple, and it's just not. Anyway, magic book, right? Look at this book. It's a magic book. If you found this book and you were, desperate to find the cool backstory mythology of who we were as a people, and here it is in our ancient language. This is what the Victorians did a lot with Old English. You would
Mm.
want to know that the sort of great mythological character of this people.
Go on, lower the boom.
Oh, come on. Come on. Like just imagine with me. It's like you've said you've put in all the right things, because everybody, the thing is, Casey, you are the best student I have, because
Oh, thanks.
you play with me and you tolerate this. But you're also, the thing is, you're also giving it's like what people tend to think of when they think of the Anglo-Saxons. It's like, okay, so it came after the Romans, fine. Okay, but then, the reason we know anything about them is because they're using the Roman language, so that's a puzzle. It's a mixture of kings and stuff. We might be able to tell some stories about maybe Alfred, and possibly Athelstan is actually kind of cool, but we'd have to do a whole nother lesson on that. Um, we have some of the things that they wrote, but it's like they must have had this great oral tradition to, they came from the continent, they came from Frisia, their language is still, sort of spoken in some places. It's, they must come from the deep, dark, forests of where there's, great Germanic traditions, and that kind of world must be the one that most people online, when they start imagining what the Anglo-Saxons are, they want to have access to, right?
Hmm.
I've lost time. What's the next picture that I have here? Oh, yes, that one. These people must have lived in houses like this. The
Oh.
Golden Hall on the cliff that is, in fact, in New Zealand, because that's where they built this set, right?
Yeah.
But I am certain, just for a moment, and when I turn that picture on, everyone, oh, she's finally to tell us some stories. So this tedious thing about sources and technology of media. And look at this. It's like, it's a mead hall. It literally means mead hall Meduseld, right? You all recognize this, right? The best way is play the Howard Shore's theme song, which we should use for the Rohan, right? For the
Mm.
Rohirrim. This is Rohan. This is the Anglo-Saxon people that, oh yeah, they have horses, which Tolkien says, okay, so the Anglo-Saxons are not famous for their horsemanship. They're famous for their ships, but not their horsemanship. But he puts the the Rohirrim in the middle of the land, and they the ships of the plains, I suppose, they ride their horses, but they have this whole sort of culture that we've imagined in the movie and in the story, built around basically telling stories around the fire in the mead hall.
Mhm.
Okay, Rogue Wave is right. Step one of being a historically important figure: get yourself a royal biographer. Yes, because
Yeah.
spot on, right? The reason we have any imagination about Alfred is because he's got Asser, who's from Wales, which is complicated, writing his biography, right? Which is super complicated because the actual manuscript that Asser's life was written in got lost. So it's all of these ways in which like we desperately wish that we had like concrete things about the lives of these men. And never mind what, well, actually we have some of what Alfred may have thought about. But if we Athelstan, there's no biography of Athelstan, Alfred's grandson, except in the Anglo-Norman William of Malmesbury's account of the deeds of the kings, and it's like 10 pages, right? And so like we have massive, extensive, when Sarah Foote in her biography of Athelstan keeps saying lengthy account, and I'm like, it's 10 pages. Stop making people think that there's a whole book about it. It's 10
Yeah,
pages.
if I hear lengthy account, I think like hundreds of pages.
No, it's like 10
Yeah.
pages. And most of it's like based on what William says he found in a lost book. And there's this poem, but it was in bad Latin. So he rewrote it. So we're not even sure the poem it's like, we have
That sounds sketchy.
it's so sketchy and so frustrating because you want to have like you want the kings that lived in these mead halls, right? You want the stories told about their lives and their adventures and their heroism, and you've got the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And I really wish to make this point, I should have. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is like grok summary entries, right?
Mhm.
And we have multiple versions of it, and so you can do some compare and contrast on the different accounts. But it's like so and so fought a battle. Most famous battle that Ethelstan ever fought, Brunanburh. We don't even know where it was. There's like a whole, possibly, right? There's a there's a whole like raft of scholarly literature on exactly where these places were. We don't even know that. I mean, they're on the
Why
island.
now? Why wouldn't people know that? We know who he is. We know his name. I mean, I don't know a lot about him, but I recognize the name. So how did we not know these great battles? That's an interesting question.
So the Battle of Brunanburh, there's a whole poem about it in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, pages and pages, pages and pages about this battle. No clue where it was. I
That
mean,
is so
it's north,
strange.
probably, maybe. Oh, actually, sometimes they've suggested it's like in Devon and Cornwall. It could be in the west. It could be by Ireland. Sarah does a long job saying it's probably, it makes sense if it's like near the the invaders coming over. He's fighting the Danes. They're
Yeah.
always fighting the Danes. Coming over from Ireland because their Danes are in Ireland at that point. No clue. Most famous battle that Ethelstan, probably without that battle, if Ethelstan had lost the Battle of Brunanburh, there would be no England because the Danes would have taken over and the Anglo-Saxon, I mean, all the book, our Exeter book, right, is not written down, and this copy is written in the 12th century, 11th century probably. So 100 or so years after Athelstan at the earliest. If the Danes had won in Brunanburh, none of this, it's quite possible it would have had the same effect as William the Conqueror taking over, wiping out the language as a literary language, and we'd have none of these poems. Oops, I gave it away. Okay. Yes,
I know what it is.
you do. This is a poem. Can't you tell? No page layout. Sorry. It's it is a poem.
I think the mead hall gave it away.
The mead, well, okay, maybe because you expect them to do what in a mead hall?
I tell stories,
Tell stories,
sing songs,
sing
talk about their
songs, right?
exploits.
To strum. The bard needs to. I need a harp, right? You need the harp. Like, Ireland has its harp on its money, right? Or its
Mhm.
flag.
Well, it doesn't have its own money anymore. It's flag, yeah.
On its flag, right? So you expect the harpist to be harping the songs of the Anglo-Saxons and their great deeds. And, we have that's one poem about Brunanburh, which we don't know where it was. If Ethelstan had lost that battle, indeed, probably England wouldn't exist. Most of the story would be different because the Danes would have wiped out that noble family, and that would have been it. So,
Mm.
and we don't know where it was.
I think it's significant that that was left out, but I don't know
No,
why. I don't know
Brunanburh
what
is
it
the place
signifies.
name. We don't know where it is.
I know. I think. Oh, it sounds Irish. Number one,
It wasn't in
but
Ireland. It was definitely on on the bigger island. It wasn't in Ireland. They were somewhere on the island that they could walk
Scotland.
from Wessex. Trust me, they've tried to figure this out. The name is
Okay,
the name
just
is
sounds Gaelic.
the name is Brunanburh, but the scholarship, we don't know where it was. Maybe
Mm.
one day they'll find an archaeological site where there's a lot of you know graves of the soldiers, but they
Yeah.
haven't been found yet. So it's this mystery exactly where it was fought, exactly how it was fought. Guys who like walking battlefields and figuring out how things were done, they don't know where it was. And like
Mm.
Sarah in her book includes a map of like all the places that have been suggested. They
All the possible places.
possible It's like all of the islands.
Yeah.
Somewhere on this island there was this big battle that made it possible for there to be England.
It's like looking. It's like pirate treasure. You just know it's there, but it's somewhere. You gotta
Maybe,
find it,
right.
right?
But it's
Yeah.
like not knowing where the great battles of the American Revolution were fought at all, right? It's like Gettysburg. Where was that? Who knows? We have no idea, right? That's the Civil War, obviously. But it's the elements of the story that are that significant, and you'd think, and we want there to be some way of having access to this mythology, right? Okay.
Mhm.
Rogue step 2: make sure you live long enough to be interesting. The biography survives the ages somehow. Well, that or lie about everything outrageously. Well,
It's embellishment, not lying. That's
we
such an
can't
ugly word.
tell if we have one source. Okay, so Bede is interesting because we actually have some other sources from his lifetime, and apparently what he's doing, it's not so straightforward as you might think. He's celebrating um the possibility of an English church in order to counter the Northern association with this Bishop Wilfrid, who was incredibly important in the founding of Bede's own monastery, but Bede manages to downplay his own role in his account of what was going on. And Bede is very famous for the big debate over the date of Easter, but he does it in a way that makes the English seem right and the British seem wrong, but gives the Irish an out for being wrong with the Brit anyway.
It sounds like a lot of politicking
Oh, it's a lot
went
of
into this.
politicking. If you want to know, Anglo-Saxon history is just as like ferocious and, I mean,
Yeah, I can
bloodthirsty
remember.
as certain
Yeah.
current political situations.
Well, I can remember being very consistently confused and wanting very badly to understand um, English history, but it does get very complicated. And I had to study it, just a little bit of it,
Right,
because I was studying English. And so, as you're studying literature and the history of English literature, you need to know all this stuff because these references are constantly being made. And so, they would
right.
teach you some of the history and some of this some of the lines of kings and some of the nobility, but it's very confusing.
It,
It's very confusing.
and it gets you get into the weeds pretty fast and pretty intensely because you start realizing all of these court politics and who
Yeah.
married who and whose sons. I mean, they're murdering people constantly. And there's it's like
Hmm.
the 400 years of history that we can glimpse is not only battles that kill off half the population of this town or that, and sieges of the towns. Somehow the kingdom is becoming very rich at the same period, and you have no idea how, because like London keeps getting sacked by the
Killing
Danes.
people and taking their stuff, maybe?
The Danes keep showing up and getting paid off or hired as mercenaries because it's so wealthy. So
Yeah.
Meduseld is somehow achieving this but barely can see
Early
it. Still
privateering?
early privateering. The British are carrying on. The Normans are pirates, and so are, well, anyway. So is
Hmm.
so is the British Empire, according to the Poland Balls. Um, that it's But they don't seem to be operating with any sort of fellow feeling, like all for one, England, one for all and all for one. It's like, you murdered my brother and I'm going to kill you, and he's our king, but only until this guy comes in. It's pretty disheartening if you want to feel like, we're all here against the Danes until we ally with them and then kill those guys.
Yeah. And start intermarrying with them and creating a new nobility, which will be taken over by the next nobility, and
just
where
just like
everybody
just like
kill a
the
bunch of other people.
Europeans in front of their flags right now, because everybody knows, if you read enough Substack, that the real power, the real powers that be behind the scenes are the ancient families pulling all the strings. It's like, good luck with that, figuring out which ones they are. They can't.
If they've done it right, they don't want you to know. they, I don't know who they are.
It's
It
kind of
seems
a
rather
miracle that any
simplistic.
of them survive their own kinslayings, frankly,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Anyway,
Right up until the First World War. Speaking, here we come full circle, right?
again, yes,
With
it's
the Tsar
another
and
of
his
these
family.
same stories. The
Yeah.
Germans and the English are fighting. Wait, when have they ever done that? Let's just start with the Anglo-Saxons being invaded by the
Big
Danes.
family fight. Yeah.
Right,
It's a big family fight.
right. Okay, so they
Over and
clearly
over
they
again.
they clearly have a lot of these stories to tell in those meat halls, right? Of all of
Hmm.
these kinds of factional arrangements and feuds and stuff like that. Oh, okay, I'll put you all out of your misery. Right? No, they don't. We have one, Beowulf. Right? And you will be expecting me to be reading Beowulf for you, but of course, that's not really what they sang in these mead halls necessarily. Maybe Beowulf, we have Beowulf, but in the Exeter book, we have a lot of other poems sung by guys like this one who's holding his harp. You recognize the guy in the picture with the harp? Did you when I showed it to you?
I didn't know. I didn't recognize the picture of it.
Okay,
Mm-mm.
so there's a guy in a picture with a harp. He's surrounded by, there's one guy who's juggling knives and balls standing above him. This is my favorite pictures.
The jester.
Yeah, actually like a jester, right? And there's another guy who's got something that looks like a violin, a viol,
Oh.
and there's a trumpet, two guys with trumpets, and he's got a crown on. He's a king with a crown and a harp.
Hmm.
Must, like, be
I actually thought, is it King David because he had the harp, but I thought probably not.
Oh no, you were right. It's King David.
I was right. Oh wow,
Yes.
I got one! Yay!
So, what would you? And this is actually from one of our Anglo-Saxon psalters, right? It's Tiberius Psalter. Um, Mead halls, songs sung around the fire, mythological. Let's say, what is it? Britain, rather. She hasn't yet, but I'm sure she'll get there. Let's hope he doesn't drop a knife. Well, yes, indeed. Rogue Wave, did you mention the absolute 100% fact that England was founded by Brutus, the descendant of Aeneas? I'm sorry to tell you, they don't know that story. That's invented in the 12th century. Sorry. By Geoffrey Monmouth. Guys, we'll do a whole one on like the origins of the Arthurian legends. Anyway, I will now. This probably we have a long enough time to tell the story now. The story that came from this book, right? This one that I'm showing you here, Old English. Very likely the kind of stories that these bards have been singing around the tale fire for hundreds and hundreds of years, to judge from what Bede tells us about the earliest compositions that they have in Old English. It's very mythological. And here I've got Craig Williamson's translation. It's a beautiful translation from the Complete Old English Poems. Are you willing to trade talk with a stranger? Give a seer or a singer, poet or prophet, a greeting, a welcome with wise words. Question the far traveler about creation, its natural power, its bodying forth into everyday wonder through God's grace, its life-quickening capacity and clout, its marvelous moving among men. Each waking wonder is a telling token to the man who understands the wide world, holds a map in his mind, comprehending the shape of creation, and contemplating the past, knowing that long ago warriors and poets could weave truth in proverbs and prophecies, their measure of melodies, the warp and weft of song, so that through their repeating, rehearsing, revising, men might remember this web of mysteries, God's gift of world wonders, of life's rich riddles, of the deep down shaping, sustaining spirit. So let the deeply thinking man, seeker and seer, who reflects on the seminal secrets of creation, unlock his word hoard, inscribe for the world's understanding the art and craft of narration, the treasure of a good story, the gift of signifying song. A wise man never grows weary of watching wonders, of contemplating this grand creation, of acting wholly and wisely in the world. Now okay, that's the opening. That seems to me something you could sing in Medjugorje, right? It's like travelers and the world is out there and there's wonders and you're going to question the travelers coming with these myths from far across the world. Um, yeah, so if you've heard that, what do you think this song is going to be about? Try to tell. Okay, guys, let me. Chat always has to catch up because the stream is
Okay.
it's David, right? Felix Ruber is David, right? What chat? What do you think this story is going to be about? And thinking this is the I love that it sets up. Are you willing to trade talk with a stranger? Give a seer, singer, poet, or prophet a greeting, a welcome with wise words. That one Williamson's translations are great. They're delightful because they share the the alliteration of the Old English.
Mhm.
And he captures there's a whole like sub industry of capturing the feel of Old English and modern English, right? It's like I like his. I think they get very close, but that
Nice.
plays on the compound word hoard, right? Unlock his word hoard,
I love that
inscribe for the
phrase.
world's understanding, the art and craft of narration, right? You're going to unlock your word hoard. This is a song to be sung, which is also written, but it's the sort of storytelling is craft, right? It's magnificent.
Mhm.
They're not trying. Guys,
It's
come on. Go ahead.
I was gonna answer it, but I'm gonna give them a chance
Yeah.
to. I almost blurted it out, but I
Don't blurt
thought,
it
but I'm not
out
gonna
yet.
do that.
But
No, no.
the setup feels like it's going, you're going to get travelers' tales and wonders
Yeah,
and this it's the poem itself is talking about the art of crafting story, which I love, right? I think it's
yeah.
magnificent and beautiful. They're wary. They're wary. It's because of course I pointed out that the people in this culture are pointing to a great storyteller and singer, King David. Right?
Right.
That's a psalter, right? The great
Yeah,
songs that they're singing are
the Psalms.
the psalms, right? Well, let's hear the great story that's told in the mead hall. And in fact, if you read Beowulf, you realize this is the story that the bard sings in Herot to start with. It's exactly a form of this particular story that the
Mm.
bard sings before Grendel comes and eats everybody, or at least Ash here. Okay. Understand this lesson, learn this lore. Let me tell you first of the Creator's power. His everywhere abundance, his mind and might. It's greater than yours, no matter how quick. It is greater than yours, no matter how quick. Your intelligence, how deep your understanding. Your mind cannot grasp his infinite wisdom. Wow, this is like intense, right? His grandeur, his glory. No earthwalker, no dust dweller can wrap his mind around God's magnificent work any more than the Lord grants according to his plain purpose, his high decree. We must always give thanks to the Prince of Peoples, our eternal Lord, both now and forever, who grants us grace, a radiance of spirit, so we may rise up to the heavenly realm if we obey the commands of the King of Heaven and are not found wanting at last in our souls. Hmm. Hmm. You really want the Anglo-Saxon mythology, right? You want this to be the Anglo-Saxon mythology. You're desperate for this to be
Some pagan.
the Anglo-Saxon mythology. I'm promising you, Tolkien got this. It is. Hear this praise song in the beginning. Almighty God the Father, guardian of all gifts, created heaven and earth, the fathoms and floor of the wide seas, and all the world's creatures, visible and variable. Through God's guidance, they praise his everlasting purpose and power, raising their reverent songs to his high splendor. Our great Creator wove the world as one, shaping all creatures with craft and purpose. Everyone moved as the mover intended in his majesty and meaning according to his laws, so all things brighten and bear his glory. All things ring round the world, praising him, following his artful original word, dwelling in the places where he justly put them, following the course that the Lord commanded. The seas kept their boundaries, the sun and stars, heaven's candles hold their bright places, maintaining their course. The blessed Lord of life leads all of creation, directs all beings, all doings in his fathomless embrace. All life is drawn into his heart's hold. He is the gentlest of judges who shaped this life. Each morning the sun rises, bright and beautiful, over the misty hills, the dark horizon, walks out of the east over the waves, wondrously adorned at the day's dawn. The brightest of flames, a lustrous light, shines on the living, the torch of God. It is a source of splendor magnificent to men on earth who have been given the gift of sight by the Creator and King. Then the glorious star sails off into the western sky like a wanderer until it dives down in the last touch of twilight into the deep waters of the western seas. Night follows according to the Lord's natural laws. The sun sails downward into darkness, shining somewhere on secret roads under earth's embrace, behind the world. No man is so wise that he knows the way this traveler takes, or where the bright blaze hides its light, brilliant as gold, how it sails over the plains into the endless edge of darkness and beyond, beneath the surging seas, or what earth dweller in an unknown land might still see the sun's splendor across the ocean while we sleep in darkness. Thus the Lord, with unfolding purpose and unending knowledge, shaped the world, the day with the night, the deep with the high, the wind with the water, the land with the sea, the field with the flood, the fish with the waves. These works do not weaken but weather well. He keeps them strong, maintains the muscle and sinew of each splendor, so that each remains steadfast, firmly in the grasp of God's hands. His glorious power is the source of all standing. Those who dwell in the Lord's keeping in God's household are eternally blessed, surrounded by joy. They live with the beloved host, countless throngs of saints and angels in the company of the glorious King of heaven, gazing on his radiance with devoted eyes in full faith. They have enough of everything. Who sees the light knows who made the eyes. Who loves the Lord lacks nothing. In heaven's hall, there is faith and feasting, radiance and revelry, the music of angels, and the eternal comfort of the King of glory. So each person must resolve to serve God. Let each of the children of earth forsake all empty desires, all idle pleasures, all fleeting joys, all transient treasures, and aspire to that abounding heavenly bliss among the blessed, where all sin is shed, all evil eradicated, all malice undone, by God's mercy in that better kingdom.
Beautiful.
I love it.
It's
In
beautiful.
the translation, it's called the Order of the World. Sometimes it's called the Wonders of Creation.
Mm.
Yeah,
That's the prettiest description I've ever heard of sunset. It was just beautiful.
we just had the eclipse, right? And it's like here's moon
Yeah,
and sun, and where is the sun when it's not, the darkness. It does seem to be a flat, but don't be deceived. I think it's going round, right? And so you're imagining where is the sun when we're not
right. And
in
who's
its
looking
light.
at it? What person yet met is looking at it now that
Mm-hmm.
it's gone down
Mm-hmm.
that you might meet in the future. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah. It makes you wonder about everything and everyone.
the whole world. And so the next picture I have, and I didn't prep, I like Casey having to struggle with it as you guys do. um
She likes toying with me. It's okay.
it's called instruction. You should have seen me last night at fencing practice, right? There's these new the kids that are fencing, like maybe they're 10 or 12 or something, and some of their moms were there, and one of them was asking me, was like, after I fenced with her daughter, and she's like, how did she do? And I'm like, yeah, I don't make it easy, right? Well, I beat her or whatever. Well, of course, because I can hit her and she can't hit me. And I'm like, she needs to keep her point on target. She's a beginner, right? But she's great. She's like,
Yeah.
really, like, gotta stay in it, and then you'll learn, right? Stick with me, and I'll put you through your paces, and then you'll know. This is what the earliest world map we have from the Anglo-Saxon period. It's the cotton world map. Did it look like a
Oh,
world map to you when you looked at it?
oh, is that what it was
That
supposed
was
to
that
be?
what it was.
So she dropped this on me about 5 hours ago. So I didn't
With
have
no
time to actually
footnotes.
study it, but I'm glad I didn't because I would never have figured it out. I would never have guessed that was a map of the world.
Well, so you
I
could look.
thought
Go ahead.
what was interesting was the star at the bottom of it. I thought, is that supposed to be the North Star? I wondered. And why is it at the bottom?
No, that's an island.
It's shaped like a star, though.
Yeah, I think that maybe Malta. I don't know. So
Hmm.
it's a world map. It's the orientation is to the orient, right? The east is at the top.
Mm.
So at the very top, there's this little independent little island thing, which is paradise, right? But then you also have
Okay.
various seas and such. The wiggly, squiggly sea in the middle is the Mediterranean. To tell you that this map is, when the oldest world map we have from Anglo-Saxon England, and that England is the squiggle down in the lower, like, which way is it to you guys? The lower this
The
hand
lower
side,
left.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some islands down there. It's like, it's not, they don't, like, maybe now, the English or the Americans put, ourselves in the center of the map, but they didn't in Anglo-Saxon England. They put themselves down on the edge because they know they're not at the center of the world. The center of the world is
The center of the world
Jerusalem.
is Jerusalem.
Right, and
I got the right one. Okay.
these TO world maps are showing, right, the Mediterranean and the rivers make this T, and the Asia's at the top, Africa's here, and Europe is here. Europeans did not put themselves at the center of their own maps until the age of exploration and the Mercator projection kind of thing, and we're not even really at the center
Mm.
then, right? The whole world of wonder that this poem is describing, they have an understanding of it. It's not centered on them, it's centered on the whole of creation. They don't have themselves as English and therefore we're the most important people in the world, right? They're in relationship with the rest of the world, which they've learned about, over the centuries. And among other things, a lot of their art is from Egypt. They know that, right? They
Hmm.
have very Egyptian style Coptic paintings in their biblical manuscripts and things. They know Latin comes from Rome. The Anglo-Saxon kings, the pious Anglo-Saxon kings, keep going there
Mm.
pilgrimage.
Yeah.
Yeah, Canute goes, even as king of the Danes, and he comes back and he's like, "I'm going to be good to both Danes and the English." Right? That they're very connected with the rest of the world, but again, not in the ways, if you're thinking of the way the British Empire interacts with the rest of the world, it's nothing like that. They don't think of themselves as, they do tell stories by the 12th century of King Arthur conquering everything, but that's the Normans. Um, it's a our place in creation meditation that they seem to have most strongly, and it's the mythology that they live in is the Bible, not some other.
Yeah.
The whole point of Tolkien was they don't write down whatever mythology they had before they converted. They make no record of it. If there was an oral tradition of what the Anglo-Saxons believed before they become Christian, we have no clue.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that part of the poem talks about, what the sun goes down and what person is actually watching it come up somewhere else. So they were,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, very aware of people in other countries because if they themselves didn't travel a lot, their king did. He went on pilgrimages, or there were marriages where people would come from, noble marriages. People would come from other areas of Europe,
Right.
and there was a lot of trade, and there was a lot of intermarriage, and there was a lot of cultural exchange that happened like naturally, not forcefully. That's
Well,
really fascinating
it goes
because
it goes both ways. I mean, there's a lot of pillaging and
yeah,
stealing.
that too.
To be fair, I mean, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms become wealthy. Guess what they export other than tin?
I was going to say tin, but that was my guess. What do they export other than tin?
Other than
What do the
tin,
English export other
other
than
than
tin?
tin. Okay, so
Coal?
no, they don't. No, they're
Not
not using
yet.
coal. That's
Not
the
yet.
19th century, 18th,
Um,
19th century. So one of the great
no.
stories about Gregory the Great is how he decides to, and Bede includes this story, how he decides to send the missionaries in 597 to the English to Kent, Ethelbert and Kent. Now,
Ah.
the big backstory is Ethelbert's already married to a Frankish queen, Bertha, and she's
Mhm.
there in his court with her own her own household and her priest because she's a Frankish princess, right? So the very earliest, English king that we have these stories about is already married to someone from outside of England. She's
Mhm.
Frankish, and the Franks by this point are Christian. So probably what's going on. I mean, actual in like actual stories, probably what's going on is um, part of the condition of their marriage, making this alliance with the Franks, is that she get to carry on with her own worship observances, and it's conceivable that Ethelbert like asked for someone to come. It's hard to say who like triggers it, but the way that Bede tells the story, it's Gregory the Great's great idea to send missionaries to the English, and this is a super duper telling reason of why. It's like in the true mythology of England, it's like why the English are we're going to call them English. Have you ever heard the phrase "non Angli said Angeli said non Angli said Angeli"?
No, I don't know
Not
that phrase.
Angles, not English, said Angeli, angels, not
Ah.
English, but angels. Now, why would he call the English angels? Well, they are probably blonde, probably.
Oh, I think I
But,
know the
but
story.
why are they there in Rome? They're not
They saw
Christian yet.
slaves.
They're slaves. No, they
They
are.
saw slaves.
They're
Yeah.
being sold.
They're being sold. No, Gregory and his entourage, they saw slaves.
They
They
saw
saw English
slaves.
slaves.
They saw
And then they
slaves.
sent that, right. And then they sent the missionaries.
There's English
Yeah.
people everywhere. You know why? They were captured by the Danes and sold.
Right.
The slave trade. The Danes are not just coming and pillaging, the stuff. They're taking people.
Mm.
Yeah. So the medieval slave trade. It's like this is again. This is like everybody, absolutely everybody who wants to. Actually, and I should have put the pole and ball cartoon in that was on my. I was looking for pole and ball cartoons to go with English this today, and there's one where the pole and ball, the British pole and ball is making fun of the America pole and ball for having a slave, a 8 ball slave, right? I guess that the
Mhm.
black slaves are eight balls, right? In the pole and ball world, he's saying how silly it is that they had to needed slavery to still pacify their people, and then he's got a string of chained countries in Australia, right? The
Oh,
convicts
right.
that are sent down to Australia. Well,
Mhm.
if you're going to want to find your genetic relations because you're convinced, guys, people out there on the internet, that you are the nation of the people that have the genetic, you're going to have to look everywhere because
Mhm.
this slave trade has been going on forever, and
Yeah.
the Danes were pillaging the island to take people, um, and they sold them down. There's the famous like Russian down the Rus the Russian slave route that goes down to the Black Sea, Crimea. They sell them
Mhm.
down to the Mediterranean, right? That slave trade continues throughout from the north throughout the Middle Ages. They're actually also in the law codes. You can see this in the Anglo-Saxon law codes. There are still slaves in the law codes, and the thing that I was stumbling over about, if a unfree woman is raped, she to be compensated for the same as if she's free.
Mm.
Slavery is not. It's they have slaves. They're selling slaves. The wealth of the island seems to come from the slaves. It's not entirely clear that the English themselves aren't participating in the slave trade. So genetically, we're all mutts. You've got to get over it, everyone. The mixing has been happening all along. There is never a period in which these people are purely not connected with everybody else or their land.
Right.
It's a telling of creation. That we did the fall, Chad. We did We did a whole episode on the Genius manuscript on the fall
That was fun.
last summer.
That was a good
Yeah,
one.
yeah. I feel like
Yeah.
I don't remember what we called it, right? But the probably the Anglo-Saxon poem that, because of the manuscript that is owned by a friend of Milton, is the, in fact, backstory version of Paradise Lost. It's that
Right.
one. Yeah. Um, right. And so the Aeneid, the myth of Romulus and Romulus, all of this, right? It's like the peoples moving around is a constant in human history. So arguments about, we were the people here first, um, are nonsensical. It's like human history is a history of movement of peoples and conquest. Um, but the flip side of it is, it's like, whose mythology is it? It's like, it's in the Anglo-Saxon language. It's the earliest Germanic vernacular to be written down at all, and the stories that we have in it are the retellings of the scriptures and the Psalms. Right? We've got lots of Anglo-Saxon versions of the Psalter, part of which is attributed to King Alfred, right? That the king saw himself as a Davidic figure, and like the
Hmm.
king, Alfred does prose translations of the first 50 Psalms, allegedly, and we have psalters in um, Old English with glosses and things like that. They clearly use the psalters to learn to read, and they gloss the Latin with Old English to learn to read the Latin by the 10th and 11th century. But the stories that they're
Mhm.
telling, the sort of mythology that they're using, is creation and Christ and the King of Glory and the mead hall. I mean, it's like this company of angels, the glorious King of Heaven. When they're mad, we're imagining what they're like. This sort of storytelling that they're doing in the mead hall, including in the Lord of the Rings. We go back to that, right? It's the song that they're singing in Heorot and Beowulf is this one, the Song of Creation.
That very one?
We don't actually know, like, exactly,
Okay.
right? But in Beowulf, the ship, the bard, sings a song of the creation, the creator.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's a powerful image if you're maybe even a new Christian, or remembering old ways and old stories and mead halls of, oh, by the way, this is what the kingdom of heaven is. It's like this. It's like it's
Mm-hmm.
trying to help them understand it, because then they go, oh yeah, I want to go there. Right. I mean, that was part of it. It was teaching.
Well, but okay, so but okay, but then think about what we've just done. We flipped it around. This sounded to us like the most glorious mythology we have. Interestingly enough, that's not in the Bible, right? It's the story of
Right.
creation, but
Right.
the dwelling in the Lord's keeping, in the household eternally blessed, surrounded by. It sounds like the meat hall. It's like
Right. It sounds
they're
just like it.
right, and so the problem with Christianity, it's like now we've got the flip side of it, of like, what's true Christianity, and
Mm.
what Tolkien thought he was doing. I mean, he always says he's trying to tell the stories, like peeling out from the Old English the hints of the lost mythology, but that lost mythology that he ends up with in the Aina Lindale and the Elvish stories and everything, it's basically this, right? It's sing the song of creation. So
Hmm.
that the sort of referential mirror version of things is, guess what? I mean, our great English myth is the Bible. I know, it's great, isn't it? And this is, so it's saying, here we have David. There's the world as they're imagining it, and there's the Creator. And this image of Christ in Majesty is from a book, the Codex Amiatinus. It's copied. It's a this Codex Amiatinus. We've talked about it before, but it's the um, oldest complete Vulgate in existence. And this oldest
Wow.
complete Vulgate in existence, it's down there in Italy now, but it was because it was made in Northumbria, north of England, in Bede's lifetime by Bede's abbot, and taken by Bede's abbot Culfrith to go to Rome. Right? They
Mhm.
made it as a gift for the Pope, and
Oh
it never
wow.
it, and it gets down to Rome. Somehow it ends up in that. Italy, in northern Italy. It's a little bit complicated how these things travel, but the book itself, I've talked about it again. I've talked about it before. It weighs 75 pounds. This was some book, right? It's huge.
Wow.
It's absolutely huge. No, it gets better. They made 3 of them.
Wow.
Bede's monastery has so many cows that they make 3 of these giant Bibles, and this
And so
illustration
many clerks
and
transcribing
great
it down.
copyists, right? So much so
Yeah.
that this is one of the books that in the 16th century, when they want to print the Latin Bible, the Vulgate Bible, this is one of the ones they consulted. This copy
Wow.
that's made in England in the 8th century in Bede's monastery and sent to Rome as a gift for the Pope. So then here's Christ in Majesty, and if you imagine this, this is who they have in their heads, right? Their great
Mhm.
mythology is Lord of Heaven and the Maker, right? And here he is enthroned in the heavens with the cherubim, with the angels, in the the rings of creation of the elements, and the characters on the outside of it are the evangelists, right? So this image is in the book. It's you've got the Old Testament. This is there's the one side of the last page on the Old Testament. You flip it over, and this picture is there, facing the New Testament, right? So it's this God who we've seen in the Old Testament and all the prophecies, as the poem says, right? The
So what you're saying is the Anglo-Saxon, stories are Christian.
mm-hmm,
That's what they wrote about, and that was their worldview.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Pretty nifty, eh? Right? And if you're expecting, so I'm very sorry. Beowulf is
Unexpected.
still Christian, right? Dragon and everything. You want to know why we're called the Dragon Common Room? Because I know my Anglo-Saxon. um, that the world that they're imagining has all of these wonders in it. It's you can see again, you can see how Tolkien just got completely wrapped up in both but recognizing it's Christian, feeling like there must be some like deeper layer of mystery behind all of this, but ultimately ending up with the deeper layer of mystery is the truth of our revelation. It's what we live in now. And so it's like is this global or national? You're in real trouble because we've just sung the world, the
Yeah, right.
creation. I mean, this is if we have a missionary purpose, which we do because we're the Mosaic Ark, we're sailing around everywhere in the seas of the world. We're here to say this is the truth, right? And you, as Christians who are listening to us, must in your lifetime say it out loud. This is the truth. It's not here's our okay. I'm gonna pulpit. I'm on the
Yeah.
pulpit now, right? It does not help to spend your life saying we are going to like preciously precious hold on to our precious whatever, because what we need to say is the truth is the one that was revealed to us through Christ, and that's it.
Why didn't Christ say, "Yeah, you don't put your lamp under a bushel," you know?
Well, that too.
Yeah, you're not allowed. You're not allowed to keep it to yourself.
Right, but what I'm answering is the thing that I said I admitted that I read Substack. I admit I read a lot on the internet now, and I one of
Mm,
the things that everybody's fighting about on the internet right now. Maybe we can go back to the peoples of the pies. Right, here we are, the nations, the people standing in front of their national flags. Right, this false dichotomy between nation and world that everybody's trapped in. Right, we are in wars right now because some people are claiming I'm gonna get in trouble. Some people are claiming right to land because of their ancestral claim on it.
mhm.
This is going to be complicated because it depends on which we did about this time last year we were doing the Putin Tucker Carlson interview, right? And here
Yeah,
we got the documents. Well, I got
right.
documents. I got documents
And
too, and my documents say, guess what? Who has controlled this territory has changed over the centuries in every
yeah,
single square foot of the earth.
right, same thing for Ukraine, same thing for Greenland, same thing for Panama, and all of these issues keep coming up over and over again that everybody
Remember,
has.
where is it? Where is the battle that King Ethelstan fought that made England England? We don't know. Was it in the north? Was it in the southwest? Was it in around London? Probably not. We okay. So we need the history because it shows us how entangled we are in the story all along. Lesson 1, right? But lesson 2 is, what you're actually arguing. And I think this is where I wanted to go most, because I said it's like we've been doing this category thing all along. We wanted to get to the sacred, right? Let's go back to the world. You're king of the world, right? Wait, Christ. He's the king. Christ is
Yes.
king of the world, Lord of creation.
Hmm.
Understand this lesson, learn this, Lord. Let me tell you first of the Creator's power, his everywhere abundance, his mind, and his might. Right? We know this. We know this absolutely. He knows he's made this world for us to live in. We know that. He's given us land so that we can have food. We know that. We do exist. We know politically we do need to exist locally because that's how we seem doomed to negotiate with each other.
Huge.
We we are. I mean, doom is actually the it's a doomsday book, right? What does doom
Hmm.
mean? I've lost my old English. It means something like meeting, right? The, that
I don't
we are
remember.
doomed to somehow have to negotiate our relationships with each other on this earth. Um,
Hmm.
but the nations that are claiming that they can kill other people because they own the land more than other people do, no, right?
Hmm.
The Anglo-Saxon England came into being because of um, kinslaying over and over and over again.
Yeah.
The flip side of this is, though, you don't get you see, Christ really is king. Do you see where I'm going with this? If I confused everybody but me, I'm still confused. Yes, Chad. Well, you read the Anglo-Saxon poems like the Panther and the symbolism simply beautiful. They had an awe of things that had to be shared. Yes, the awe, the Anglo-Saxon awe is something I wish we could recover. I think that's what Tolkien was really wanting to do, because he read these texts. He was at Exeter College, right? So right, isn't it? Oh my God, excuse me. Um, the Exeter book was one of his major texts because it's one of the four great manuscripts of the Anglo-Saxon poetry. So he certainly knew that. The riddles, the Exeter book contains the riddles, so that Tolkien is fascinated with the way Smog has his riddles. The riddling of the Anglo-Saxon tradition is part of it. And you can see that even in this poem. Um, I'm trying to come up with a way that makes sense to say both the nationalism argument that people are getting vexed about can't be solved in the terms that the 19th century set. How's that? Yes, that's partly the problem, right? That the 19th century under the British Empire invents many of these problems that we have in talking about what nations are, with the way in which the Poland balls are trying to deal with it, right? Britain doesn't even acknowledge England as its own mythology anymore. Um, I wish I was remembering who was saying that about England, like completely missing out right now. It has no stories. They're all lost. They're all subsumed into this imperial story. So it's like the heartland of what is allegedly the empire doesn't have its own story. And even to the effect of nobody studies Anglo-Saxon England now. It's like
Hmm.
it's not really it's a joke, right? Of egg kings and this difficulty of this several hundred years of chaos until the Normans get there and it's all quick, clear, and simple. And then you have Magna Carta and administration. That's more complicated than that, obviously. But the opposite side of saying everybody gets to have their own um, worldview and mythology is equally problematic because it means that there is no. Uh, I really need you to help me. Does any of this make sense? It,
Yeah, there's no common frame of reference.
I mean, so the global frame of reference that ironically the globalists have distorted is the reference of we live in we live under the creator. That's the one step.
That sounds
Oh,
well.
here, this
Okay.
is what the example. I was listening to Dan Bongino talk to Evita, and Dan made the usual apology that we make, and I'm telling you, we can't do this. Um,
Right.
because he's talking about how this was his last day with his podcast show
Hmm.
before he's going to be
Yeah.
director, the associate director, assistant director in the FBI, and so he's not going to be
Yeah.
able to speak as a public figure anymore because he's going to
Right.
be taking on this service to our country in this law enforcement role, and
Hmm.
that he's sad to be leaving his show and taking on the service that's difficult, right? You're taking on the service, and he goes back to thinking about it as, this is what Christ taught us. This is what we take on our service. We have to take on our service. And he said, and this is what I believe as a Christian. And then he made this is where I wanted to go. He made the usual apology of saying, well, maybe you're not Christian, but it's there in all other religions. No, it isn't.
What?
There, I
No,
got you.
stop.
Right?
No,
No,
stop.
stop. Right?
Stop.
It's
Everybody wants everybody
the
to be the same, but we're not.
truth, right? That if you
Yeah.
live in the world, the order of the world that this poem describes in the English tradition of understanding the scriptures, which point to the world, which point to creation, this is the truth. And
Yeah.
ironically, it doesn't help to say, oh, but you can have your different truth. Please stop
Yeah.
doing that.
Or but that your truth is separate from my truth, but it's the exact same thing. Well, how can it be? It would be the actual literal same thing if it were. That's
Right?
illogical.
So you guys have been worried that we were never going to define anything. Guess what? Christ is king. And to be able, from within our own language, because this is English, it was our language, it is our language, it's the tradition we're talking about, from within our language to show the world, right? The irony of the global vision that thanks to the British Empire, everybody's speaking English, and we have to fight this global world problem because of the English and the British Empire. Both the particular and the universe, it's like they've been flipped, right? So we want the global empire, everybody speaking English or Latin, or I don't know what, Chinese. We want the global empire of power in the world, and all of the local mythologies that then I don't know what to get to battle it out under their different Poland ball characters is like, I'm gonna have my king, and you're gonna have your god, and you're gonna have your god, and they're gonna be fighting gods. No, flip it. Christ is the King of Kings. And
Right.
and
Well,
it
they don't want the globalists don't want that kind of competition.
No, no, the globalists
No.
don't want us saying this because the globalists want the power to be of this world.
No, they want the rule of law instead of, Christ as Lord. They want the rule of
Well,
law,
no, I don't
which
think they want
is
the world law. I think they want the rule, right? The
that's what
we can
they mean. See, it's a
Yeah,
different
yeah. Come
dictionary.
on. We've been talking about how they fiddle the categories constantly. They say rule of
Yeah,
law, but
of
that's
course they do.
yeah, but that's one of their like bait and switch things, right?
Yes,
What they
that's my
simply
point.
want is rule, power,
Right.
imperial power
Well,
of
what that phrase,
their
yeah.
whole like, globalist.
Well, that's what that phrase means. The rule of law means whatever I mean, whatever I tell you it means, right? Because I make the rules and you have to follow the law because you're
It's
not
their
me.
current mythology, their bait and switch mythology. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, they keep repeating that phrase for the past couple of decades. I've never liked it because it doesn't mean
It
anything.
doesn't mean anything, and it's not because there's actually no anchor to it, right?
Right.
If there's no God creator, there's no justice, and there's no anchor for the law, which the Anglo-Saxon kings understood when they were writing their
Hmm.
laws down. They grounded them in the scriptures, in fact, right? So
Right.
the Anglo-Saxon kings saw themselves not as king of the world, although Geoffrey Monmouth does that with King Arthur, but don't worry about it. The Anglo-Saxon kings saw themselves like David as bound by God, right? And so
Hmm.
that they translate the Psalms and they see themselves as penitential under the King of Kings. And the terrible inversion that we're living through right now is the unwillingness of Christians to, in fact, be firm and saying, yes, we are creatures of Christ.
Right.
There you go. That's it. That was my point. Let's see if the chat got it. All right. So, uh, there's no, gosh, Chad, no, there's no such thing as genetically pure nations. There isn't. It's
Of
impossible.
course not.
The women are all mixed in anyway, right? The men intermarry with all sorts of women from all sorts of different groups. There's no
Yeah.
genetically pure nations. It does not work. Don't go there.
No.
It's very dangerous
I,
to even
I've
play
I've
that
known
game.
people who have said things like that to me before. None of them were European, by the way. Um, but that it's provably false.
Okay, Chad, we still haven't convinced Chad. He's saying, though, I would say without a bloodline, you don't really have a nation. There is no pure bloodline. It does not exist. It has never existed. No population has
Right.
ever been pure in those terms. It simply does not happen. And,
Mm-mm.
and the purity of the bloodline, with the reality of slavery as a human institution, means the Europeans have been mixed up with the peoples outside of Europe for millennia.
Right.
We
Because
think
they
of
were
slavery
trafficked
now
all
as
over the
simply the
world.
Europeans taking Africans to North and South America. That's a
Oh, that was
one
late in the
that's
slavery
one
game.
yeah, that's one part of the long story of you know coerced labor.
Right.
And the angles are come into history originally as people being sold as slaves in
Hmm.
Rome, which is
Right.
astonishing, because why are they being sold? They're in Rome, Christian Rome. The slave trade is still going on throughout the early Middle Ages
Yes.
among Christians. Right. Okay. Well, anyway, that was my point, which we've been creeping towards for these to get you all at least to shake you up and say, if you're going to say anything positive, say Christ is king, but
Right.
not within this particular nationalist frame that unfortunately the trick wants to make you play. Christ is king of all the nations. And we don't get out of the political mess by pretending that everyone gets to have different religions. And ironically, that seems to, that's intolerant. Well, that's philosophically necessary in order to have a consistent worldview. We can talk more about what that worldview looks like. But if you like the poem that I read, that's the one that we're going for, the wonder of creation. Let's start
Hmm.
there. Because it's in fact where the Anglo-Saxons started, and all of the papal letters to them early on are, cre- you know, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. That's our reality,
Yeah.
like all of us. I don't want to stop. I want to keep saying this. I mean, how many times, right? Right? It's like, understand this lesson, learn this, Lord. Let me tell you first of the Creator's power, his everywhere abundance, his mind and might. It is greater than yours, no matter how quick your intelligence, how deep your understanding. Your mind cannot grasp his infinite wisdom, his grandeur, his glory. No earth walker, no dust dweller can wrap his mind around God's magnificent work any more than the Lord grants, according to his plain purpose, his high decree. We must always give thanks to the Prince of Peoples, our eternal Lord, both now and forever, who grants us grace, a radiance of spirit, so that we may rise up to the heavenly realm if we obey the command of the King of Heaven, commands of the King of Heaven, and are not found wanting at last in our soul. Hear this praise song.
Mhm.
Glory be to God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
There's doxologies everywhere. God, I'll praise God from whom all blessings flow. That's our heritage and our birthright, but it's because we're humans and made in the image and likeness of our Creator.
Yep.
I don't want to stop. Do I praise Him? Good night.